Hello and welcome, I'm your Kudmaki, and here is the Steam Year in Review 2024. This is a really detailed, super long blog post covering pretty much everything they did throughout the entire year. They usually do this every single year, and it's always awesome to be able to see at a glance just how much stuff actually happens in one year. Especially for Steam, for some people it might seem like they don't really do too much, they really just cash the checks and make billions of dollars. But in reality, they're actually actively trying to improve the store all the time. I think that's one of the reasons why Steam is still undoubtedly the winner when it comes to any kind of store page. It is very popular with both developers and players, specifically because it generally is a great platform and because they keep trying to improve it. So here they talk about the various things that they did in the entire year. By the way, I wrote about this in my Game Dev Report newsletter. I write a new issue every single Sunday with all the weekly news and any interesting game dev articles that I come across that week. Check it out in the link in the description to sign up. So yep, here the Steam 2024 Year in Review. We are now in March, and Steam has just published the Steam Review 2024. This is an excellent detailed post talking about all kinds of Steam stats for the year 2024. It was yet another record-breaking year. Recently they hit 40 million CCUs, that's insane. And if that truly is mind-boggling, the amount of people that exist on Steam is something that is pretty hard to comprehend. When you see how the peak online is literally 41 million people, that is 41 million people online at the exact same time. So in terms of unique people across the entire month, I think it's like 250 to 300 million people. So Steam truly is an insane platform. It is bigger than most countries. When talking to developers, obviously the issue about the split rate always comes up. There are some developers that do feel that Steam does not necessarily justify their 30%, but personally, while I do wish, of course, that it was a bit smaller, especially for indie devs, I think it would be awesome if they had like 10% or even 0% for like the first 10k that you make, then like increase it up to 10% to like the first 20k, then like 20% to the first 50k, and after that maybe go up to the standard 30%. So I do wish they did that, but I don't expect them to do that. And even at 30%, I still think it's a pretty great deal. Because again, 30% that buys you access to this massive, insane audience. Personally, I have tried selling games before Steam. What eventually became my first Steam game, I first published it off Steam, just on my own website. And in about 6 months, I think I ended up selling like 50 copies, something like that. Whereas then, as soon as I published it on Steam, just on the first day, I sold like 500 copies. And that was back then when Steam was much, much smaller. So yep, it might suck to pay for those 30%, but they do give you access to this massive, insane audience. So it always becomes the usual question that happens in so many scenarios, which is you prefer to have a bigger slice of a tiny pie or a tiny slice of a massive pie. And of course, the 30% doesn't just buy you access to that audience, it also buys you access to all the various backend tools. Steam is generally an entire platform, it is not just a storefront. So over here, let's see everything that they added in 2024. So Steam has continued pushing towards improving discoverability and shopping. This is one area that they are constantly trying to improve all the time. And that's awesome, that's very important since it is definitely a very tricky problem to solve. Every Next Fest they try new things, and this recent one actually gave more visibility to more games at the start, as opposed to starting off with fixed top lists right away. This is actually a really important change that they did recently. Previously, let's say the meta for getting to the top of the Next Fest charts, the strategy used to be get a ton of wishlists right before the Next Fest, so like the 1 week before, you would promote your game like crazy to get a ton of wishlists so that you get a high wishlist velocity. And then as soon as the Next Fest starts, basically all the games already have a high wishlist velocity, all of those would basically be spawned at the top of the list. That was the correct strategy, but now on the last one, they made it a little bit more level playing field. So on this last one, they basically made it how for, I think like the first 2 days, basically everyone, regardless of wishlist velocity in the past, regardless of that, every game got an X amount of visibility, X amount of impressions at the first, I think 2 days, and after that, then everything gets sorted between the top most played games. So yep, right away, I think this is an awesome change. It's one of those relatively small things, but actually has a great impact. It means that even if you don't have an insane marketing muscle, even if you come to Next Fest with very little wishlists, technically, at least for the first 2 days, you will get quite a decent amount of visibility. And then assuming your game is actually good when compared to all the competition, based on that, you might actually be able to blow up and actually gain quite a lot of wishlists. So yep, small change, but I think a very good one. Also, more themed sales and themed festivals, giving more opportunities to devs to get their games seen by players. You should participate in these as much as possible. So yep, these festivals are definitely really awesome. They're like tiny Next Fests or tiny sales, but they're focused on one specific thing. So if your game is a part of that genre, then this can be really good. And of course, there's always the benefit, which is how your game can only participate in a single Next Fest, but you can join as many of these mini festivals as you want. So yep, like there was one for real-time strategy games, one for idler games, one for couch co-op games, for visual novels. So yep, all of these, I think this is really awesome. Once again, it's them trying to improve the discoverability challenges. Instead of putting them all just on one giant Next Fest, instead of that, with these different genres, it has more options, more chances for games in different genres to find actually some space in the spotlight. So yep, I think this is yet another great change that I think they started doing just last year. Then player reviews in 2024, they also got a new helpfulness score with more helpful reviews showing up at the top rather than just memes and jokes. This was something that they pushed out last year, basically adding the new helpfulness system. There were some concerns back then about whether this would actually be helpful, since technically it's some kind of algorithm trying to define what counts as helpful versus not. But at a quick look, I do think that reviews are actually pretty nice. Over here under display, you can sort by most helpful, and if you see, those actually seem to be a little bit more detailed with not as many like just memes and jokes and so on. So if you're the kind of person, like so many people, that likes to read reviews quite a lot before buying a game, then I think this change was a very positive one. Then the Steam Workshop also got some major updates that impact how subscriptions work and managing downloads. It's really crazy how it's been 14 years since that one launched. And yeah, the Workshop is definitely another thing that once again the 30% pays for. It is something that a lot of players really like, and actually leads to a lot of sales for a lot of developers. There are some games that pretty much have a massive long tail. They continue selling copies over and over again for like 10 years after release, specifically because of so many mods, so much support on the Steam Workshop. Then Steam Families left beta in 2024, and now anyone can create their own Steam family and share some games, along with various parental controls. It even has a child purchase request feature that I did not know existed. So yeah, this is another pretty big feature introduced in 2024. This is definitely one of those things that is very user-friendly. As far as I know, only one person in the family needs to own the game in order to play it. I think that's how it works. And yeah, the child purchase request, that's really funny. Basically, your kids can make a request on some kind of game, and you can approve and just pay it automatically. I had no idea that was a thing, but it does sound like a great feature. And Steam Recording is apparently pretty big. I've never used it myself, but there have been millions of clips recorded by users. So yep, this is another thing that I've never really touched on. Apparently you can record parts of gameplay. Apparently it's constantly recording all the time. And then you can go back whenever something cool happens, just record something, slice a clip, and then post it on Steam's kind of like internal social media or with friends, something like that. And then some developers can implement rich presence with things like timelines and event markers. So you have another very interesting feature, very complex, that apparently is used by millions of people that I had no idea it existed. Then for developers, demos got a massive update in June, dedicated pages. This was the great Steam demo update that happened in July 2024. And the main thing was indeed that one, was how demos can have a separate store page, which is then linked to the main store page. So once again, another thing where Valve basically saw how demos were becoming more and more popular, so they basically started trying to improve that process. Previously used to be just a tiny button on the corner of the screen, whereas now you have some proper pages. Those proper pages actually link to the proper final game. So you have lots of tiny improvements that improve the connection between demo and the final game, which is great because again, demos are extremely important. Then the backend store page editor got a big boost, easier to work with. The calendar is very awesome, very easy to register for various upcoming events and themed sales. So you have the calendar that you see in the Steam backend. Again, goes back to them making more themed sales, more events, more festivals, more things. It can be really tricky to keep track of, but with this calendar, it really makes things very easy. You can immediately see what kind of games that you have that are potentially eligible, then just sign up and it's pretty much all automatic. That's probably one of the things that I love most about Steam. You don't necessarily have to like contact support or send an email to Steam and wait a ton of days to get some kind of reply. Nope, you just go through all of the self-serve tools, just automatically register your game, set up a discount, and everything happens automatically. And they also added a new More From section on a game store page that you can customize to display your other games. So yep, if you go to a game and you scroll all the way down and you up over here, you can customize this as a developer. You can set it to show your other games, you can set it to show your publisher's games or things like that. There's something that is really awesome because one of the best things that you can do as a developer is simply make more than one game. That is actually one of the biggest issues that so many developers make. They make just one game and then quit. Whereas what you should really do is make multiple games, because as soon as you make the first game, the second game you are going to have quite a bit more experience. So the development process is going to be easier, and then the marketing will hopefully find a bit more success, and then as you make another game, and so on. So basically making multiple games, that's the closest things there is to some kind of cheat code in order to help you find success. And if you have multiple games, then yeah, you can take advantage of this. You can have those multiple games and then promote each other, which then of course helps you find more sales, helps you actually make a living as an indie dev. So quick tip, make more games. Then Daily Deal, this one also got a self-scheduling feature. So if your game is successful enough, it is now easier to get a Daily Deal. So now there's a little Daily Deal registration. If your game is eligible, this will show up, so you can just automatically select some kind of day and that's it. Once again, it goes back to the same thing about so many of Steam's tools being all self-serve. You just click a button, everything happens automatically. Although for this one, for the Daily Deal, you still have to first have some kind of eligibility. And for that, and like I covered in the last Game Dev Report, you should definitely try to get a Daily Deal. So this was another Game Dev Report, and in here I wrote about every Daily Deal of 2024, how much money you can actually get from a single 24-hour deal, how many slots there are, and just how much money you need to make in order to actually be considered for the Daily Deal, And actually, it seems that there are some games that can get in without being massive mega hits. So if your game was well received and got a bunch of reviews, even if it didn't sell an insane amount, it still might be worth to try to contact Steam support to see if it is possible to get a daily deal. Technically, if you got very few reviews, the odds are low, but still, it might happen. By the way, this analysis over here, this was made by Chris Zukowski. If you want to learn about Steam game marketing, definitely go ahead and watch all of the various videos that I did with Chris. Difference between knowing nothing about marketing and knowing just a little bit about marketing, difference is massive, so definitely make sure you know about it. Then for some data, they tracked first-time purchasers to see if they stick around and buy more games, yes or no. And the result was, yep, 1.7 million new users that played for 141 million hours and spent $94 million. Importantly, they did not say on just the first game they purchased, they actively bought other games. This is definitely one of the most important stats. There's always the issue that some developers fear that basically a ton of players, they will just buy whatever big game there is and don't play any more games at all. But the stats do say that's not the case. Some people might come to Steam and buy their only game by just, let's say, some kind of Call of Duty. But then since they're inside the Steam ecosystem, since the whole thing is connected together, since they get notified about different sales, different things, at some point it seems that most of those players actually do end up trying other games. So basically it leads to more revenue for every kind of developer, even if it's those AAA games that bring them in, then they spread out and basically buy games from various indie developers and so on. Then some major takeaways: new release revenue per year has increased almost exactly 10 times since 2014. That's an insane amount. This kind of highlights just how much Steam has grown in the past few years. In 2024, more than 500 new titles exceeded 250,000 in new release revenue. That's up 27% from 2023. And also, more than 200 new titles exceed 1 million in new release revenue. That's up 15%. So despite the fact that obviously Steam is very crowded, there are tons of games. Despite that, since the audience is growing more and more, despite that, more games are actually still finding more success. Then Steam is also global, with both players and developers coming in from every country on Earth. So TCG Card Shop Simulator, this was one of the biggest hits, and it came from a solo dev from Malaysia. This definitely is one of those scenarios that proves just how insane it can be, just how life-changing it can be. You can be just a single solo dev living in some kind of country that is not like the US or Europe, and yet thankfully there are no limitations, so you can publish a game from anywhere. And as you publish your game, you might get a massive mega hit like this one that has made something like $20 million. So this is all possible due to Steam investing in self-publishing tools, local currency support, localized documentation, and regional outreach. This leads to more developers and tons more players, so yeah, I really hope they keep doing this. That's another thing that I really love about Steam, is how they're not pretty much just US and EU focused, which usually happens with so many things. They actually are very globally focused, and because of that, again, more developers, more players, so pretty much everyone wins. And my tip here is make sure you localize your games. Always remember how the English-speaking audience on Steam, I think it's only like 40%. Here looking at the Steam hardware survey, if we look under language, and even look at that, English is only 23%, Simplified Chinese is 50%. Oh wow, I didn't know it was that massive. Okay, that seems like a massive jump, but yeah, definitely just like that. So definitely make sure you localize your games. Don't just do English and that's it. If you do that, then you are basically leaving a massive audience just hanging around. And if you want to localize them, then I have a lecture on Unity's super easy to use localization tool in my Ultimate Unity Overview course. This is the tool, and yep, it is really easy to use, so if you have any kind of game, I highly recommend you look into localization. So it's all really impressive, another great year. It's great to see these stats and see everything they do in the entire year in a single blog post. The reason why they keep building upon Steam is the reason why it's still the best place for both players and developers. Basically, the more that Steam and the Epic Game Store and other platforms try to improve, the better it is for developers and players. And yep, that is indeed my takeaway. More competition is really awesome for us as both developers as well as players. I did my usual private live stream yesterday, and we got to talking about Steam and how impressive it is that it has been around for so long. My Steam account is actually 21 years old, so I'm pretty sure I have a Steam account that is actually older than some of you watching this video. Also, how thankfully it is run by a pretty great private company that seems focused on genuinely improving it rather than just sitting back to collect billions of dollars. These posts are really great to see how, despite Steam being so mature already, it is still in constant development, so that definitely helps in making it worth the 30% cost. So yep, again, it sucks to have to pay 30%, it would be awesome if it was smaller, but at least they are indeed actively trying to improve the platform, trying to find more players, trying to find more ways for developers to make money with their games. So building all this stuff throughout 1 year, it does make it a little bit more worth that 30%. So yep, that's Steam in 2024, and now I look forward to seeing what they're going to do in 2025. Alright, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.